This expert from the SEC Network does not think so in Paul Finebaum. He talked about how Florida State didn't have a chance. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't going to be anything special. Florida State's sitting at about a 13.5-point underdog, which is quite interesting. I think that the game is going to be a little bit more closer than what Paul Finebaum thinks. But what are kind of your thought processes on it not being a competitive game by that SEC analyst going so far?
Yeah, that's what is that surprising, right? Like that's not surprising at all from the
Yeah,
from the SEC, from anyone in the SEC, honestly. It's and it sucks because it's I would say rightfully so, right? The ACC hasn't really produced a lot, and we haven't been consistent, and there hasn't been a ton of um, dominance coming from this conference. So I don't think that there's really should be a ton of respect put on the ACC at the moment. But you're going to expect that. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that that's the case. I think we are going to play competitively. I think we have a chance to actually win this game. And the reason is that there's no replicating Nick Saban. There's no replicating that system. There's no replicating the demand that he received and the demand that he forced upon his players. There's no replicating that. So it's like for a team to think that yes, we had a down year, but like we can kind of get back to that like Saban type. That's not real life, right? That's not how that works. So the reason why Nick Saban got paid the amount of money that he did was because he was who he was. You can't replicate that, and if you could, then we wouldn't be sitting here right now talking about this game. Like it wouldn't even make sense, right? So at the end of the day, I definitely think that's going to be a competitive game because the guys that we have on our team, one, we have a solid team, but two, we have guys that refuse to be embarrassed again, right? Like at least that you would hope so. And then you have a team that is questionable at best at Alabama, a team that seems like they have the attributes and they have the things that probably gonna give them a pretty solid season, but things are really shaky. And when things are shaky, you really look for things to be consistent. And right now, as long as we can come out and have a solid showing, like a solid showing, things are going to continue to be shaky and continue to be questionable. And that is where FSU can then come in and say, okay, we have them on the ropes, like right, like there's no real confidence in this team. Let's continue to push forward and see if we can get this win. So I think that the opportunity is very much there for Florida State to be able to have a win. If not, be able to have a good showing, which should hopefully propel us into a solid confidence boosting opportunity going into the next games that should hopefully be wins for us, then kind of continuing that same streamlined system throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that Florida State is competitive, and they will keep this game competitive. The biggest thing I think about is former Florida State offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham, who's over at Arizona State now as a head coach. He's one of the better offensive minds in the game now at this point. He was able to get the Sun Devils over to the College Football Playoff last year, and he was very successful. He was even had a very good quote at Florida State when he was here at a press conference, talking about how he wanted to keep his offense above the chains, wanted to keep it above the chains at this point. So instead of you getting a 2nd and 11, 2nd and 12, and you get to a 2nd and 7, you turn it into a 3rd and 4. You're making it 3rd and manageable, 2nd and manageable. You're keeping it above the chains at this point, and you're wanting to stay away from those negative plays against Alabama. So obviously, when you're Castellanos and you're making those comments, you don't want to be playing hero ball at this point. You want to play with your teammates. You want to understand that this is a game that you have to take control of. You cannot force the issue. So obviously, if you're trying to throw a deep ball to Deuce Robinson, for example, a 6'6" target, you don't want to force it over the top in front of double coverage. I mean, yeah, he could probably come down with it, but if he drops it, it floats up in the air, it's a pick. Next thing you know, they're at midfield. You don't want to have those situations where it's costing your team because you're trying to play hero ball. Obviously, Florida State wants to run the football. We heard it last year. They wanted to run the football last year, and you guess what happened at this point? Florida State only had 89 rushing yards last year per game. That was one of the worst in the country, actually only behind Kent State, who they play in the 3rd game this season. So prepare for that barn burner couple weeks later. But Florida State added a Gavin Sawchuk. They added an Usman Kroma from the high school ranks. Those are probably going to be 2 running backs they're going to probably lean on this year. Gus Malzahn is a guy that wants to be able to run the football efficiently. Thomas Castellanos, while he was in a Bill O'Brien offense last year that had about 150 rushing yards last year, the year before he rushed for 1,100 yards. So you're wanting to establish that running game with him, with the running backs, with everybody else. So you're wanting to have that running game efficient because that's what's going to keep you effective against Alabama. I mean, you're
Yeah.
going to have that aggressive defense there. They're going to be trying to be able to force you into third and longs to where they know that your weakness is having those short intermediate passes and you're not able to do so. So realistically, how are you going to be able to respond to that is going to be a big question. You have a guy like Deuce Robinson who was talented in high school, was a five-star recruit, but he hasn't really done much at USC. He come to Florida State. He's got all the talent. Squirrel White, he had 800 yards in the SEC a year and a half ago, but he's coming off an injury in 2024. Your receivers are not the greatest in the world. You're trying to find efficient ways to be able to move the football. One way to do it is going to be running the football. So realistically, I think Florida State's going to really have to be able to run the football. They're going to have to stay ahead of the chains, and they're going to have to be able to force Alabama into a turnover, into a third and long, into something to be able to kind of make the adversity strike for them. Because as we see, I mean, if you're being able to put the pressure on Alabama at such an early rate, it can be very good for this team going forward.